A scorching summer wind blew across the parched plains of the Texas Panhandle as Jessamine O'Malley stepped off the train at Tascosa station, clutching nothing but a carpetbag and the crumpled advertisement that had brought her halfway across the country. The year was 1884, and the bustling cattle town of Tascosa was alive with the sounds of commerce, livestock, and the occasional gunshot that reminded everyone this was still very much the wild frontier. Jessamine smoothed down her travel-worn dress, a modest navy blue that had once been fine, but now showed the dust and fatigue of her long journey from Boston. At 22, she had left behind a life of respectable poverty to answer the call of a man she'd never met, a rancher who had placed an advertisement for a bride in the Eastern papers. The exchange of letters that followed had been brief but promising. He had seemed kind, educated, and most importantly, he offered her a chance at a new beginning far from the memories of her parents' deaths and the subsequent loneliness that had plagued her. She squinted against the harsh sun, searching the crowd of cowboys, merchants, and townspeople for the man who was supposed to meet her. According to his last letter, Mr. Henry Dawson would be waiting at the station, eager to finally meet his bride-to-be. Instead, she found only curious stares and the occasional tipped hat from strangers. "Miss O'Malley," a gruff voice called from behind her. Jessamine turned to see a stout man in a worn suit, his face red from the heat and exertion. "Yes, that's me. Walter Jenkins, madam. I work for Mr. Dawson. He sent me to fetch you to his ranch." The man didn't quite meet her eyes. Oh, she couldn't hide her disappointment. "I was expecting Mr. Dawson himself. He's indisposed at the moment. Very busy man, Mr. Dawson." Jenkins awkwardly reached for her bag. "If you'll follow me, I've got a wagon waiting." Jessamine hesitated but handed over her carpetbag. What choice did she have? She had spent nearly her last dollar on the train ticket to Tascosa, and she knew no one in this dusty corner of Texas. The wagon ride was long and uncomfortable, the sun beating down mercilessly as they traveled away from town and into the open rangeland. Jenkins was not one for conversation, answering her questions with short, non-committal grunts. As the hours passed, Jessamine's anxiety grew. The landscape was unlike anything she had known in Massachusetts' endless expanses of flat, dry grassland, punctuated by the occasional scraggly tree or rocky outcropping. It seemed a harsh place to make a new life, but she was determined to try. "Mr. Jenkins," she finally asked, "what can you tell me about Mr. Dawson?" His letters were somewhat sparse in detail. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably on the wagon seat. "Been working for him for about 5 years now. He's a successful man, got one of the largest spreads in the county." "And his character?" she pressed. Jenkins kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Not my place to say, miss." The sun was setting by the time they reached a cluster of buildings that comprised the Dawson Ranch. The main house was larger than Jessamine had expected, a 2-story structure made of sturdy timber with a wide porch. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse completed the compound. A few cowboys lounged near the bunkhouse, eyeing the wagon curiously as Jenkins pulled up to the main house. "Here we are," Jenkins said, jumping down from the wagon seat. "Mr. Dawson should be inside." Jessamine descended carefully, her legs stiff from the long journey. She smoothed her dress again, wishing she looked more presentable for this crucial first meeting with her future husband. The front door opened before they reached it. A tall man with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard stepped onto the porch. He was well dressed in a fine suit that spoke of wealth, but there was something cold in his eyes that made Jessamine's stomach tighten. "So you're the girl," he said, looking her up and down with a critical eye. "Jessamine O'Malley." "Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Dawson." She extended her hand, trying to smile despite her exhaustion. He took her hand briefly, his grip firm but impersonal. "Come inside. You must be tired from your journey." The interior of the house was well appointed, but lacking a woman's touch. Heavy, dark furniture dominated the rooms, and there were few decorations beyond a couple of hunting trophies mounted on the walls. "Jenkins, take Miss O'Malley's things to the guest room," Dawson instructed. "She'll be staying there until arrangements are finalized." Jenkins nodded and disappeared with her bag. "Please, sit down," Dawson gestured to a chair at the dining table. "You must be hungry." "Thank you, yes." Jessamine sat primly, trying to read the man who might soon be her husband. He seemed different from his letters, colder, more businesslike. A Mexican woman emerged from what must have been the kitchen, setting down a plate of food without meeting Jessamine's eyes. "Thank you," Jessamine said, but the woman had already retreated. "That's Maria. She handles the cooking and most of the housework," Dawson explained as he poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, "but she's getting on in years. That's partly why I need a wife to take over the running of the household." "I see." Jessamine picked at her food, her appetite diminishing despite her hunger. "Your letters mentioned you were looking for companionship as well." "Yes, of course." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A man in my position needs a proper wife. It's expected." Jessamine nodded, a sense of unease growing within her. This was not the warm welcome she had imagined. "Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to some of my business associates in town," Dawson continued. "I've arranged a small gathering. They're eager to meet you." "That's very kind," she replied, though she wondered why he was in such a hurry to present her to others when they had barely met themselves. That night, alone in the guest bedroom, Jessamine fought back tears as she unpacked her meager belongings. The room was comfortable enough, but it felt cold and impersonal. She took out the bundle of letters she had received from Henry Dawson, rereading them by candlelight. The man who had written these thoughtful, sometimes tender words seemed entirely different from the stern, calculating individual she had met today. Had she made a terrible mistake coming all this way? But what choice did she have now? With no family, few friends, and almost no money left, her options were severely limited. She would have to make the best of this situation, at least until she could figure out an alternative. Morning came too soon, with Maria knocking softly on her door. "Senor Dawson says to be ready in 1 hour." "We go to town." "Thank you, Maria." Jessamine rose quickly, washing with the cold water in the basin and putting on her best dress, a green cotton that had once belonged to her mother. It was a bit dated in style, but still presentable. When she came downstairs, Dawson was waiting, dressed in a fine suit and hat. He looked her over critically. "That will have to do, I suppose. We don't have time to get you properly outfitted before the gathering." The carriage ride to town was mostly silent, with Dawson occasionally pointing out landmarks or properties he owned. Jessamine tried to engage him in conversation about his ranch operations or his life in Texas, but his responses were curt and uninformative. They arrived at a large house on the outskirts of Tascosa, clearly belonging to someone of means. Several other carriages were already there. "Remember," Dawson said as he helped her down from the carriage, "these are important people in this county. Make a good impression." Inside, the house was filled with well-dressed men and a few women, all of whom turned to stare as Dawson led Jessamine into the main parlor. She felt immediately self-conscious in her simple dress. Henry, a portly man with an impressive mustache, approached them. "So this is your mail-order bride we've heard so much about." Jessamine winced at the term. "Indeed," Dawson replied. "Gentlemen, ladies, may I present Miss Jessamine O'Malley, recently arrived from Boston." "Jessamine, these are some of Tascosa's leading citizens." What followed was a blur of introductions: a banker, a judge, several ranchers, and their wives. They all seemed to study her with unusual intensity, asking pointed questions about her background, her education, her family. "And what exactly brought you to answer a matrimonial advertisement, Miss O'Malley?" asked the banker's wife, a sharp-featured woman named Mrs. Thornton. "I was seeking a new beginning after my parents' passing," Jessamine answered honestly. "Mr. Dawson's letter spoke of building a life together in this beautiful country." "How romantic," Mrs. Thornton replied, exchanging glances with another woman. As the afternoon wore on, Jessamine became increasingly aware of whispered conversations and sideways glances in her direction. Something was wrong, though she couldn't discern what exactly. Dawson had disappeared into another room with several of the men, leaving her to fend for herself among these strangers. "You know," said one woman, sidling up to her, "you're the third one this year. I beg your pardon." Jessamine asked. "The third bride Henry Dawson has brought to town," the woman continued, her voice low. "The others didn't work out, left under mysterious circumstances." Before Jessamine could ask more, Dawson reappeared, looking agitated. "We're leaving," he announced, taking her arm firmly. Outside, he practically pushed her into the carriage. "That didn't go well," he muttered as they pulled away. "What happened?" Jessamine asked. "What did they say to you?" "Nothing of consequence," he snapped. Then, controlling himself, he added more calmly, "There have been some unfortunate rumors. Nothing for you to concern yourself with." "What about the other brides?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Dawson's face darkened. "So you've been listening to gossip already?" "Those women were unsuitable. They made claims against my character when I refused to marry them." Jessamine fell silent, unsure what to believe. The man beside her seemed increasingly like a stranger, nothing like the person she had imagined from his letters. When they returned to the ranch, Dawson immediately excused himself, claiming ranch business needed his attention. Jessamine was left alone in the big house, with only the silent Maria for company. Over dinner that evening, Dawson was distant and preoccupied. Finally, he said, "There will be another gathering in town tomorrow, a larger one at the town hall. It's important that you make a better impression." "Have I done something wrong, Mr. Dawson?" Jessamine asked, her frustration finally getting the better of her. "Not yet," he replied coldly. "But there are rumors in town, ridiculous allegations about my previous attempts to secure a bride. I need you to help dispel these notions." "And how am I to do that?" "By being charming, agreeable, and making it clear you are here of your own free will and are perfectly happy with our arrangement." His tone made it clear this was not a request. That night, Jessamine barely slept. Something was very wrong with this situation, but she had no one to turn to, nowhere to go. Her small savings were depleted, and she was effectively stranded in this strange, harsh land. The next day dawned hot and clear. Dawson was already up and dressed when Jessamine came downstairs. "We leave in 30 minutes, he said without preamble. "Wear something, more impressive if you have it." Jessamine bit back a retort. She had brought everything she owned, which wasn't much. In the end, she chose her one remaining good dress, a blue silk that had been her mother's best. It was slightly too large for her, but she had managed to alter it as best she could with her limited sewing skills. The town hall of Tascosa was a sturdy brick building in the center of town. As their carriage approached, Jessamine could see a significant crowd had already gathered. This was clearly more than a social event. It had the feeling of a public spectacle. "Remember what I said," Dawson murmured as he helped her down from the carriage. "Be charming. Agree with everything I say." Inside, the town hall was packed with people from all walks of life, not just the wealthy citizens from yesterday's gathering, but ordinary townsfolk, cowboys, and even a few women who appeared to be from the saloon district. At the front of the room, several men sat at a long table, including the banker and judge she had met the previous day. Dawson guided her to a seat in the front row, his hand gripping her arm tightly enough to leave marks. The room quieted as the judge stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen of Tascosa," he began, "we're gathered here today to address certain concerns brought to the attention of the town council. Mr. Henry Dawson has requested this public forum to clear his name of various allegations." Jessamine's heart raced. What kind of situation had she walked into? The judge continued, "Mr. Dawson, please come forward with your intended bride." Dawson stood, pulling Jessamine up with him. They walked to the center of the room, facing the panel of men. "Mr. Dawson," said the banker, "you've brought 3 women to Tascosa in the past year, all supposedly as mail-order brides. The first two left town making serious accusations against your character and your intentions. They claimed you deceived them, treated them poorly, and that your true interest was in their money, not matrimony. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Those women were dishonest from the start, Dawson replied smoothly. They misrepresented themselves in their letters. One claimed to have a substantial inheritance that never materialized. The other turned out to be of questionable moral character. I sent them both away with enough money for their return journeys, only to be rewarded with slander. The judge turned his attention to Jessamine. Miss O'Malley, is it? How long have you known Mr. Dawson? We have corresponded for approximately 3 months, sir, she answered truthfully. And did you bring any money or property to this arrangement? Jessamine hesitated. No, sir, I was quite clear about my circumstances in my letters. I have only myself to offer my labor, my companionship. Yet Mr. Dawson selected you over wealthier candidates, the banker noted skeptically. I valued Miss O'Malley's education and breeding, Dawson interjected. A man in my position needs a wife who can manage a household and present herself properly in society. A woman stood up from the audience, an older lady with a stern expression. That's what you said about Clara Peters, and we all know what really happened to her. The crowd erupted in shouts and accusations. Jessamine stood frozen, bewildered by the chaos erupting around her. Order, the judge shouted, banging a gavel. We will have order. When the room quieted, a man stepped forward from the crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with sun-weathered skin and piercing blue eyes. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a streak of premature silver at the temples. Judge Harmon, the man said, his deep voice carrying easily through the room, I'd like to speak if I may. The judge nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Garrett. My name is Xavier Garrett, he said, addressing the room at large. I've worked as foreman at the neighboring Cross T Ranch for the past 5 years. I've had dealings with Henry Dawson, and I can tell you his reputation among the working men of this county is not a good one. He's known to be harsh with his employees and dishonest in his business dealings. Dawson's face flushed with anger. How dare you? This man has a personal vendetta against me because I refused to sell him water rights last year. Xavier Garrett remained calm. This isn't about water rights, Dawson. It's about your character. He turned to face Jessamine directly. Miss, I don't know what this man promised you, but I'd wager it isn't what you're going to get. Those other women, they didn't just leave. They fled in the night, terrified. One of them stayed at my employer's ranch for 2 days before we could arrange transportation back east for her. Jessamine's mind was reeling. Could this be true? The cold demeanor Dawson had shown her since her arrival suddenly made more sinister sense. This is absurd, Dawson shouted. These are baseless accusations. Miss O'Malley and I have an understanding. She traveled here of her own free will to be my wife. Is that true, miss? Xavier asked quietly. Are you here of your own free will? And now that you've met the man, do you still wish to marry him? All eyes turned to Jessamine. She felt Dawson's hand tighten painfully on her arm, a silent warning. She began, uncertain what to say. The truth was she had come willingly, but the man she had met bore little resemblance to the one who had written those letters. And now, with these accusations swirling around him, she felt a deep sense of dread at the prospect of becoming his wife. Before she could continue, another woman stood up from the back of the hall. I was in Boston 6 months ago, she announced. I met a woman there who showed me letters she'd received from a Henry Dawson of Tascosa, Texas. The handwriting on those letters doesn't match the documents I've seen signed by the real Henry Dawson at the bank. The crowd erupted again. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. That's a lie. Dawson shouted over the noise. This is a conspiracy against me, Mr. Dawson, the judge said firmly when order was restored. These are serious allegations. If you've been misrepresenting yourself to these women, I've done nothing of the sort, Dawson interrupted. Miss O'Malley, tell them. Tell them you came here to be my wife and that you've been treated well." All eyes turned to Jessamine again. She looked at Dawson's angry, demanding face, then at the expectant crowd. Her gaze finally settled on Xavier Garrett, who was watching her with concern in his eyes. She began again. "I came to Texas based on letters from a man who seemed kind, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in building a life with me. Since arriving, I've been treated more like property than a prospective wife. Mr. Dawson has barely spoken to me except to criticize or make demands." She took a deep breath. "I don't know what happened to the other women, but I'm beginning to understand why they might have fled." Dawson's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful." He raised his hand as if to strike her. Xavier Garrett moved with surprising speed for such a large man. In an instant, he was between them, catching Dawson's arm mid-swing. "That's enough," Xavier said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is none of your concern, Garrett," Dawson snarled, trying to wrench his arm free. "I'm making it my concern." Xavier released Dawson's arm with a slight push that sent the older man stumbling back a step. The judge banged his gavel again. "Mr. Dawson, control yourself. This display only lends credence to the accusations against you." "This is outrageous," Dawson spat. "She's my fiancée. I paid for her passage. She doesn't belong to anyone," Xavier interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. He turned to Jessamine. "Miss O'Malley, no one can force you to marry this man. Do you wish to proceed with this engagement?" Jessamine looked at Dawson, whose face was now a mask of barely contained fury, then back at Xavier, whose steady gaze offered something she hadn't expected to find in this harsh land: kindness and perhaps protection. "No," she said firmly. "I do not." The crowd murmured in approval. "Then it's settled," the judge declared. "Miss O'Malley is free to make her own choice." "And what about my investment?" Dawson demanded. "I paid good money to bring her here. Consider it the price of your education, Dawson," Xavier said coldly. Then he turned to Jessamine. "Miss, if you need a safe place to stay until you decide what to do next, the Cross T Ranch can offer you temporary accommodation. Mrs. Whitley, our cook, has a spare room in her cabin." "This is absurd," Dawson shouted. "You can't just—" "I believe we can," the banker interrupted. "In fact, Mr. Dawson, the bank would like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow to discuss certain irregularities we've discovered in your accounts. It seems you may have been operating under false pretenses in more ways than one." Dawson's face went pale. He looked around the room, finding no sympathy in the crowd. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The tension in the room broke. People began talking excitedly among themselves, several approaching Jessamine to offer sympathy or support. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett," she said when she finally had a moment to speak with the cowboy who had intervened on her behalf. "I fear I've found myself in a rather desperate situation." "It's Xavier, please," he replied, his blue eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "And you're not the first woman Dawson has deceived, though I hope you'll be the last. The offer of lodging stands, if you'd like to take it while you figure out your next steps." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose," Jessamine said, though in truth she had no idea where else she could go. "It's no imposition. Mrs. Whitley has been asking for female company for years. She's surrounded by cowboys day in and day out." His smile was warm, genuine, nothing like Dawson's cold, calculating expressions. Before she could respond, the judge approached them. "Miss O'Malley, on behalf of the town of Tascosa, I'd like to apologize for this unfortunate situation. We've had our suspicions about Dawson for some time, but without proof." "I understand," Jessamine replied. "I'm just grateful that matters came to light before." She couldn't finish the thought. "Mr. Garrett's offer is a good one," the judge continued. "The Cross T is a respectable establishment, and Mrs. Whitley is a fine woman. You'd be safe there while you consider your options." With few alternatives and Dawson's rage still fresh in her mind, Jessamine accepted. "Thank you, Xavier. I would be grateful for the accommodation, at least until I can determine what to do next." An hour later, She found herself in Xavier's wagon, her carpet bag beside her, heading away from town toward the Cross T Ranch. The day's events had left her exhausted and bewildered, but also strangely liberated. For the first time since arriving in Texas, she felt she could breathe freely. "I should warn you," Xavier said as they traveled, "the Cross T isn't as grand as Dawson's place. We're a working ranch, not a showpiece." "That sounds refreshing after what I've experienced," Jessamine replied honestly. "The owner, Mr. Thompson, is a fair man. He's getting on in years now, so I handle most of the day-to-day operations. He lives in the main house with his son Thomas, who helps with the bookkeeping. Mrs. Whitley's cabin is near the cookhouse, a little removed from the bunkhouse where the men stay." "It sounds perfectly appropriate," Jessamine said. "I'm just grateful to have somewhere safe to go." Xavier glanced at her. "If you don't mind my asking, what will you do now? Do you have family back east you can return to?" Jessamine shook her head. "No family. My parents died last winter, my father of pneumonia, my mother of a broken heart soon after. I was working as a teacher's assistant at a small school in Boston, but the salary barely covered my room and board. When I saw Mr. Dawson's advertisement," she sighed. "It seemed like Providence at the time." "I'm sorry about your parents," Xavier said quietly. "Losing family is hard." Something in his tone made her think he spoke from experience. "Do you have family in Texas?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore. My wife died in childbirth 5 years ago along with our son. That's when I came to the Panhandle, looking for a fresh start." "I'm so sorry," Jessamine said, genuinely moved by his loss. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thoughts of the past. The landscape rolled by vast expanses of prairie dotted with the occasional stand of cottonwoods or mesquite. It was harsh country, Jessamine thought, but there was a stark beauty to it as well. "There it is," Xavier said eventually, pointing ahead to a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. "The Cross T." The ranch was indeed more modest than Dawson's spread, but it had a welcoming feel to it. The main house was a single-story structure with a wide porch, the wood weathered to a soft gray. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn completed the compound. Men were visible working with horses in one of the corrals, while smoke rose steadily from what must have been the cookhouse chimney. As they pulled up to the main house, an older man emerged onto the porch. He was tall and lean, with a full head of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "That's Mr. Thompson," Xavier explained as he brought the wagon to a halt. "Garrett," Thompson called. "Judge Harmon sent word about what happened in town. This must be Miss O'Malley." Xavier helped Jessamine down from the wagon. "Yes, sir." "Miss Jessamine O'Malley, this is Elijah Thompson, owner of the Cross T." "Miss O'Malley," Thompson said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to our humble establishment. I'm sorry about your troubles with Dawson. The man's always been a snake." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Thompson," Jessamine replied, finding herself warming to the direct old rancher. "Mrs. Whitley's expecting you," Thompson continued. "She's beside herself with excitement at having another woman around the place. Garrett, why don't you take Miss O'Malley over to the cabin and get her settled in? Then come back here. We need to discuss what happened with Dawson and what it might mean for the water rights dispute." Xavier nodded. "Yes, sir. This way, Miss O'Malley." He led her toward a small cabin set a short distance from the cookhouse. Before they reached it, the door flew open, and a stout woman with iron gray hair and rosy cheeks emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, it's about time," she exclaimed. "I've been watching for you since we got word from town." She looked Jessamine up and down with frank curiosity. "You poor thing, what a terrible ordeal you've been through. I'm Martha Whitley, cook for this outfit these past 15 years. "Jessamine O'Malley," Jessamine replied, immediately liking the forthright woman. "Thank you for opening your home to me, Mrs. Whitley. Call me Martha, everyone does, and it's no trouble at all. It'll be a blessing to have another woman to talk to." These cowboys are good boys, but Lord, they can be dull company sometimes. She shot a teasing glance at Xavier, who chuckled good-naturedly. I'll leave you ladies to get acquainted, he said. Miss O'Malley, I'll check in on you tomorrow to see if there's anything you need. Thank you, Xavier, Jessamine said sincerely, for everything. He tipped his hat, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, then turned and headed back toward the main house. Well now, Martha said, ushering Jessamine inside the cabin, let's get you settled. You must be exhausted after everything that's happened. The cabin was small but immaculately clean, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy sitting area, and a kitchen that smelled wonderfully of fresh bread and cinnamon. It was more welcoming than any place Jessamine had been since leaving Boston. This is lovely, she said, genuinely touched by the warm reception. It's not much, but it's home, Martha replied. Your room is through there. I put fresh sheets on the bed and set out some towels. The washroom is out back. We're fortunate to have a pump right by the cabin, so we don't have to go far for water. It's perfect, Jessamine assured her. I can't thank you enough. No need for thanks. From what we heard about Dawson, well, let's just say you had a narrow escape. That man has a reputation, and not a good one. Martha bustled about, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Now, sit down and tell me about yourself while we have some coffee. Then you can rest if you like, or I can show you around the ranch. Dinner won't be for a few hours yet. Jessamine sank gratefully into a chair at the small kitchen table. I'd love to see the ranch if it's not too much trouble. I've been cooped up indoors since arriving in Texas. Of course, there's plenty to see, and I'm sure the boys will be falling all over themselves to meet you. Martha winked, especially since Xavier seems to have taken an interest. Jessamine felt her cheeks warm. He was simply being kind. Xavier Garrett is many things hardworking, honest, stubborn as a mule sometimes, but he's not one to go out of his way for just anyone. Martha set a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. That man hasn't shown interest in a woman since he lost his wife. The fact that he personally intervened on your behalf has the whole town talking. I'm sure he would have done the same for anyone in my position, Jessamine protested, though she remembered the intensity in Xavier's blue eyes when he'd stepped between her and Dawson. Perhaps, Martha said with a knowing smile, but time will tell, won't it? Now drink your coffee and then we'll take that tour, and don't you worry about a thing, you're safe here at the Cross T. For the first time since arriving in Texas, Jessamine truly believed it. The days that followed took on a pleasant rhythm. Martha welcomed Jessamine's help in the cookhouse, and she quickly learned the routine of preparing meals for the ranch hands. The work was hard but satisfying, and the cowboys were unfailingly polite to her, tipping their hats and thanking her for the meals. Xavier stopped by daily, ostensibly to check if she needed anything, but their conversations soon extended beyond mere practicalities. Jessamine found herself looking forward to these visits, drawn to Xavier's quiet strength and thoughtful nature. He told her about the ranch operations, the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh environment, and occasionally shared stories from his earlier life in Missouri. In turn, she told him about Boston, her brief teaching career, and her dreams of someday having her own home and family. A week after her arrival at the Cross T, Xavier found her sitting on Martha's porch, enjoying the cooler air of evening after a hot day in the cookhouse. "Evening, Miss O'Malley," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Good evening, Xavier," she replied with a smile. "And please, I think after everything that's happened, you might call me Jessamine." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Jessamine, then." He sat on the porch step, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "I wanted to let you know there's been news from town about Dawson." Her smile faded. "What kind of news?" "It seems he's in serious trouble. The bank has called in his loans after finding evidence of fraud, and 2 men arrived from Austin yesterday, Pinkerton detectives, investigating claims that he's been operating under a false identity." "False identity?" Jessamine repeated, shocked. "So the letters I received were likely written by someone else entirely," Xavier confirmed. The real Henry Dawson died 3 years ago in a mining accident in Colorado. This man, whoever he is, has been using his identity to establish credit and apparently to lure women west under false pretenses. Jessamine shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe I was so foolish. The signs were there from the moment I arrived, but I was so desperate to believe. You weren't foolish, Xavier said firmly. You were hopeful. There's a difference. He looked out over the ranch where the last light of day was fading. We all make choices based on hope sometimes. Like coming to Texas after losing your family, she asked gently. He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. Yes, though in my case it was as much about running away as it was about hope. And now, she asked, has the cross tea given you what you were looking for? Xavier considered her question. Not at first. For a long time, I just went through the motions, working from sunup to sundown, falling into bed too exhausted to think. But eventually, yes, I found purpose here, respect, a kind of peace. He looked at her directly. What about you? What were you hoping to find by answering that advertisement? Jessamine thought carefully before answering. Security at first. After my parents died, I was so alone and the future seemed so uncertain. But beyond that, I suppose I wanted what everyone wants: a home, a family, someone to share my life with. She smiled sadly. It sounds naive now. Not naive, Xavier said softly. Human. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell over the ranch. Finally, Xavier stood. I should let you get some rest, but I wanted to ask, there's a social at the church in town this Sunday. Would you consider attending with me? Jessamine felt a flutter in her chest. I'd like that very much. His smile broadened, a rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. I'll pick you up at noon then. Good night, Jessamine. Good night, Xavier. As she watched him walk away toward the bunkhouse, Jessamine felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope, yes, but also the first stirrings of something that might, with time, grow into something more. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that offered some respite from the Texas heat. Jessamine had spent the previous evening washing and pressing her blue silk dress, determined to look her best for the church social. Martha had helped her style her hair, pinning the dark brown locks into a simple but elegant arrangement. You look beautiful, Martha declared as Jessamine twirled in the small bedroom. Xavier Garrett won't know what hit him. Jessamine blushed. I'm sure he's just being kind, offering to take me to the social, Martha snorted. That man doesn't do anything out of mere kindness. He respects you, and unless I'm mistaken, which I rarely am about such things, he's sweet on you. Before Jessamine could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Martha winked at her and went to answer it. Xavier stood on the porch, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a black vest. His normally wind-blown hair was neatly combed, and his hat was in his hands rather than on his head. He looked up as Jessamine appeared behind Martha, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Miss O'Malley, he finally managed. You're very— He cleared his throat. You look lovely. Thank you, she replied, charmed by his awkwardness. You look quite handsome yourself. A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. The wagon's ready whenever you are. The ride to town was pleasant, with Xavier pointing out various landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Jessamine found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying his deep voice and the occasional glimpses of dry humor that surfaced in his conversation. As they approached Tascosa, however, her anxiety began to return. Will people be talking about what happened with Dawson, do you think? Xavier glanced at her. Probably. It's the biggest scandal to hit Tascosa in years, but no one blames you if that's what you're worried about. If anything, folks admire the way you stood up to him in front of everyone. I was terrified, she admitted, if you hadn't been there. But I was, he said simply, and you found your courage when it mattered. The church was a modest white building with a small steeple set on the outskirts of town. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside when they arrived. Xavier helped Jessamine down from the wagon, offering his arm as they approached the church. Inside, the pews had been pushed back against the walls to create an open space. Tables laden with food lined one side of the room, and a small group of musicians was setting up in a corner. People milled about in their Sunday finery, talking and laughing. A hush fell over the gathering as Xavier and Jessamine entered. Then, to her surprise, several women approached, greeting her warmly. "Miss O'Malley, we're so glad you could join us today," said one, a motherly woman in a practical brown dress. "I'm Abigail Peterson, the minister's wife." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson," Jessamine replied, relieved by the kind reception. "We've all been so concerned about you after that dreadful business with Dawson," Mrs. Peterson continued, "or whatever his real name is. The Pinkertons took him to Austin yesterday, did you hear? Xavier mentioned they were investigating," Jessamine said. "Well, they found plenty to investigate. False identity, fraud, possibly worse. There's talk he may have done this in other states as well." Mrs. Peterson shook her head disapprovingly. "Some men have no moral compass whatsoever." "Miss O'Malley has had enough talk of Dawson," Xavier interrupted gently. "Perhaps we could focus on more pleasant topics." Of course, Mrs. Peterson agreed readily. "The social, we have plenty of food, music starts in a half hour, and the young folks usually organize some games later. Make yourselves at home." The afternoon passed pleasantly. Jessamine was introduced to many of Tascosa's residents, finding them much warmer than the judgmental group at Dawson's gathering. Xavier remained by her side, a steady, reassuring presence. When the music began, several couples moved to the center of the room to dance. Xavier turned to Jessamine, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "I'd love to," she replied, placing her hand in his. Xavier's hand at her waist was warm and respectful as he led her in a simple waltz. He moved with unexpected grace for such a large man, guiding her smoothly around the floor. "You dance very well," she commented, surprised. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said no girl would marry a man who couldn't dance properly." "A wise woman," Jessamine laughed. "How many brothers do you have?" "Two, both still in Missouri. James runs the family farm and Michael's a doctor in St. Louis." Something softened in his expression. "We write, but I haven't seen them since I left." Jessamine sensed the pain behind his words. "You must miss them." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But after Caroline and the baby died, I couldn't stay, too many memories." They danced in silence for a moment, the music swelling around them. Then Xavier asked, "What about you? No siblings?" "No, I was an only child. My parents married late, and I think they were surprised to have me at all." She smiled at the memory. "They were wonderful people. My father taught literature at a small college, and my mother gave piano lessons. Our house was always full of books and music." "You must have been devastated when they passed," Xavier said softly. "Yes," Jessamine admitted. "I felt so alone. That's partly why Dawson's letters were so appealing. He wrote about creating a home together, sharing books and ideas. It seemed like a chance to belong somewhere again." "And now?" Xavier's blue eyes searched hers. "What will you do now?" It was the question that had been haunting her for days. "I'm not sure," she confessed. "My teaching position in Boston has certainly been filled by now, and I have very little money left. But Martha has kindly allowed me to stay with her while I figure things out, and helping in the cookhouse at least lets me earn my keep." The music ended, and couples around them began to separate, but Xavier kept hold of her hand. What if you stayed?" he asked, his voice low. "Not just temporarily, but permanently." Jessamine's heart skipped a beat. "What are you suggesting, Xavier?" Before he could answer, a commotion at the church door drew everyone's attention. A man burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "Dawson's escaped," he announced breathlessly. "Overpowered the Pinkerton man at the hotel last night and took off. Sheriff's organizing a search party now." The room erupted in exclamations of shock and concern. Xavier's expression darkened, his hand tightening around Jessamine's. You should take Miss O'Malley back to the ranch right away, Garrett, the minister advised, approaching them. If Dawson's on the loose, he might come looking for her, considering she's part of the reason he was caught. Xavier nodded grimly. You're right. Come on, Jessamine. The ride back to the Cross T was tense, with Xavier constantly scanning their surroundings. Jessamine sat close beside him on the wagon seat, fear coiling in her stomach. You think he'll really come after me? She asked as the ranch came into view. I don't know, Xavier answered honestly. But I'm not taking any chances. You'll stay at the main house tonight. It's more secure, and there will be men on watch. Thank you, she said, touched by his concern. I'm sorry to cause such trouble. Xavier reined in the horses, turning to look at her directly. You haven't caused anything. None of this is your fault. His expression softened. What I was trying to say earlier before we were interrupted. Jessamine, I know it's sudden, but these past weeks, getting to know you. A rider appeared on the horizon, galloping toward the ranch at full speed. Xavier's attention immediately shifted, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Get down, he instructed, helping her to the floor of the wagon. The rider approached rapidly, and as he drew closer, Jessamine recognized one of the Cross T cowboys, a young man named Billy. Mr. Garrett. Billy called as he reached them. There's trouble at the north pasture, cattle stampeding toward the ravine, Xavier cursed under his breath. How many men are out there? Just Johnson and the new fella, Miguel, Billy replied. They sent me for help. Xavier turned to Jessamine, conflict evident in his face. I have to go, the men could be hurt and we could lose half the herd. Of course, she said immediately. Go, I'll be fine at the ranch. He hesitated, then made a decision. Billy, escort Miss O'Malley to the main house. Tell Mr. Thompson what's happening, then get back to me with any men who can be spared. He turned back to Jessamine. Stay inside, lock the doors. I'll be back as soon as I can. Before she could respond, he was gone, urging his horse to a gallop toward the north pasture. Billy helped her into the saddle of his horse, mounting behind her to take her to the main house. Mr. Thompson received her with concern, immediately issuing orders for the ranch to be secured. Don't you worry, Miss O'Malley, he assured her. Dawson would be a fool to come here. But we'll keep watch just in case. Hours passed with no word from Xavier. Jessamine tried to keep busy helping Thomas Thompson organize paperwork in his father's study, but her mind kept wandering to Xavier, hoping he was safe. Night had fallen when they finally heard riders approaching. Thomas went to the window, rifle in hand. It's Garrett, he announced with relief. Jessamine rushed to the door as Xavier entered, his clothes covered in dust and a cut visible on his forehead. You're hurt, she said, immediately concerned. It's nothing, he dismissed, though he winced as she reached up to touch the wound gently. We managed to turn the stampede before they reached the ravine, lost only a few head. What caused it? Mr. Thompson asked. Xavier's expression darkened. Someone deliberately spooked them. We found evidence of gunshots fired near the herd, and Johnson swears he saw a rider watching from the ridge line. A chill ran down Jessamine's spine. Dawson, maybe, Xavier admitted. It would be like him trying to cause financial damage before making any direct move. He looked at her, his eyes intense. You should stay here tonight. The main house is the safest place on the ranch. I've already had Martha prepare the guest room, Mr. Thompson said, and I've doubled the watch for tonight. Xavier nodded his approval. Good. I'll stay close to sleep in the barn where I can keep an eye on the approaches to the house. Don't be ridiculous, Garrett, Thompson scoffed. You're dead on your feet. Take the sofa in the study. Thomas and I can take shifts with the men. After some argument, Xavier reluctantly agreed, though he insisted on checking all the doors and windows himself before settling in for the night. When he finally returned to the main room, where Jessamine waited, his exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. You should rest, she told him gently. You've done everything you can. I don't like this, he admitted, running a hand through his dusty hair. Dawson's too quiet, he's planning something. Perhaps he's just running, trying to get away from the law. Xavier shook his head. Men like that don't just run, they want revenge when they've been humiliated. His eyes met hers. I won't let him hurt you, Jessamine, I promise you that. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I know, she said softly. For a moment they stood close, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Xavier stepped back, clearing his throat. You should get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we'll figure out a more permanent solution to keep you safe. Jessamine nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was herself. Good night, Xavier, and thank you for everything. Good night, Jessamine, he replied, his voice gentle. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed and a small window overlooking the ranch yard. Jessamine changed into the nightgown Martha had lent her and slipped between the clean sheets, her body aching from the tension of the day. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Xavier, the feel of his hand at her waist as they danced, the intensity in his eyes when he promised to protect her. What had he been about to say at the social before they were interrupted? And what would happen now with Dawson on the loose and possibly seeking revenge? She must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start to the sound of shattering glass. For a moment she lay frozen, unsure if she had dreamed the noise. Then she heard muffled voices, followed by a heavy thud. Heart racing, Jessamine slipped out of bed and moved quietly to the door, pressing her ear against it. More sounds of struggle reached her, a grunt of pain, another crash. Then silence. Panic rose in her throat. Someone had broken into the house. Dawson. What had happened to Xavier and the Thompsons? Looking around frantically for a weapon, Jessamine spotted a heavy candlestick on the bedside table. She grabbed it, then eased the door open a crack, peering into the darkened hallway. A figure lay crumpled at the end of the hall. Thomas Thompson, motionless on the floor. Beyond him, in the main room, she could make out two men wrestling. One was Xavier, his powerful frame unmistakable even in the dim light. The other must be the intruder. As she watched, frozen in fear, Xavier gained the upper hand, slamming his opponent against the wall. But then a third man emerged from the shadows behind him, something metallic glinting in his hand. Xavier, Jessamine cried in warning. Xavier turned at her voice, but too late. The newcomer brought the butt of a pistol down hard on his head, and he crumpled to the floor. Jessamine retreated into her room, frantically pushing a chair against the door. She looked toward the window. Could she escape that way? But before she could move, the door burst open, sending the chair skidding across the floor. Henry Dawson stood in the doorway, his face twisted in a vindictive smile. He looked different now, unshaven, his clothes dirty and torn, a wild look in his eyes that spoke of desperation and rage. "Hello, my dear," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Did you miss me?" "Stay away from me," Jessamine warned, raising the candlestick. Dawson laughed. "Put that down before you hurt yourself. We're going for a ride, you and I. There are some things we need to discuss." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "Oh, I think you will." Dawson stepped aside, revealing one of his men dragging a semi-conscious Xavier into view. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple. "Unless you want to see your cowboy hero suffer even more, don't listen to him," Xavier managed to say before receiving a brutal kick from Dawson's accomplice. "Stop," Jessamine cried. "Don't hurt him." Dawson's smile widened. "Then come with me, now, or the next one will be worse." Jessamine looked at Xavier, her heart twisting at the sight of him injured and helpless. Slowly, she lowered the candlestick. "If I go with you, you'll leave him alone." "And the others, you have my word," Dawson said with mock solemnity. "Though it doesn't seem to be worth much to you these days." "No," Xavier protested weakly, struggling against his captor's grip. "Jessamine, don't. I'll be all right," she told him, trying to sound braver than she felt. Then to Dawson, "Let me get dressed first." 2 minutes, Dawson agreed. "Johnson will be watching you. Don't try anything foolish." The man holding Xavier shoved him roughly to the floor and entered Jessamine's room, pistol drawn, while Dawson stepped back into the hallway. With trembling hands, Jessamine pulled her dress on over her nightgown, not bothering with the complicated fastenings. Her mind raced, searching desperately for a way out of this situation. But with Xavier and the Thompsons injured, possibly dying, what choice did she have? "Time's up," Johnson announced, gesturing with his pistol. Move. In the hallway, she found Dawson waiting impatiently. Xavier lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath his head, but his eyes were open, watching her with anguish. "I'll find you," he promised, his voice barely audible. "Hold on." Dawson kicked him again, silencing him. "Touching, but I'm afraid Mr. Garrett won't be finding anyone. By the time he recovers, if he recovers, we'll be long gone." He grabbed Jessamine's arm roughly, dragging her toward the door. Outside, 3 horses waited, one bearing a second man Jessamine didn't recognize. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded as Dawson forced her onto one of the horses. "Somewhere we can talk privately about the trouble you've caused me," Dawson replied, mounting his own horse. "You've cost me a great deal, Miss O'Malley, and I believe in people paying their debts." With that ominous statement, he urged his horse forward, Johnson and the other man flanking Jessamine as they rode away from the ranch. She looked back once, her heart heavy with fear not for herself, but for Xavier, lying wounded and possibly dying on the floor of the Thompson house. They rode hard through the night, following no trail that Jessamine could discern. Dawson seemed to know where he was going, however, leading them across open prairie and through patches of scrubby woodland. The moon provided just enough light to see by, though Jessamine frequently feared her horse would stumble in the rough terrain. After what felt like hours, they approached a dilapidated cabin tucked into a small canyon. It looked abandoned, with a partially collapsed roof and broken windows. "Home sweet home," Dawson announced mockingly as they dismounted, "at least temporarily." Inside, the cabin was sparse and filthy. A rickety table, 2 chairs, and a moth-eaten bedroll on the floor were the only furnishings. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the air smelled of mold and decay. "Sit," Dawson commanded, shoving Jessamine toward one of the chairs. "What do you want from me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have no money, no possessions of value." Dawson leaned against the table, studying her with cold eyes. "What I want is for you to understand exactly what you've done. Thanks to your little performance in town, I've lost everything: my ranch, my reputation, my future. 3 years of careful planning and building, all gone." "You built it all on lies," Jessamine replied, finding courage in her anger. "Stealing another man's identity, deceiving women like me." "Business?" Dawson shrugged. "Nothing personal, until you made it personal." His face darkened. "Do you know what happens to me if the Pinkertons take me in? Prison, Miss O'Malley, years of it, and all because you couldn't play along with our arrangement for a few more weeks." "What arrangement?" "You never intended to marry me, did you?" A cold smile spread across his face. "Eventually, yes, after you'd signed over any assets you might have. The other 2 claimed to have money, but turned out to be lying. I thought you might be different, an educated woman from a good family. But you turned out to be as penniless as the rest. So you would have sent me away too, once you realized I had nothing to give you," Jessamine concluded. Perhaps I would have found other uses for you. A man gets lonely on the frontier." The predatory look in his eyes made her skin crawl. Outside, she could hear Johnson and the other man moving around, unsaddling the horses and talking in low voices. "What happens now?" she asked, fighting to keep the fear from her voice. "Now we wait," Dawson replied. "My associates and I are meeting some Mexican colleagues tomorrow who will help us cross the border. After that," he shrugged, "I haven't decided what to do with you yet. Take you with us, perhaps. A woman might be useful in our new business venture." Jessamine's blood ran cold at the implication. "They'll be looking for me. Xavier, the sheriff, Garrett could be dead for all you know," Dawson interrupted brutally. "And even if he's not, he has no idea where to look. This place hasn't been used in years. It was an old line shack for a ranch that went under during the drought of '78. No one will think to look here." He moved toward the door. "Get some rest. We leave at dawn." With that, he exited the cabin, leaving Jessamine alone. The moment the door closed behind him, she was on her feet, searching desperately for anything that might serve as a weapon or a means of escape. The windows were broken but too small for her to squeeze through, and the single door was sure to be guarded. There was nothing in the cabin that could serve as an effective weapon. The furniture was too flimsy to be of use, and she found no tools or implements. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but she fought it back. Xavier had promised to find her. She had to believe he was still alive, still fighting, and she had to stay alive and alert until help came or until she found her own way out of this situation. Outside, she could hear Dawson and his men talking, their voices low but occasionally punctuated by laughter. They seemed confident in their safety, which gave her a small measure of hope. Overconfidence could lead to mistakes. Exhausted but too afraid to sleep, Jessamine sank back onto the chair, her mind racing. As the hours crawled by, the voices outside grew quieter, then ceased altogether. Were they sleeping? If so, this might be her only chance. Moving silently to the door, she pressed her ear against the weathered wood. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, she turned the crude metal handle. To her surprise, the door wasn't locked. Perhaps they thought there was no need, given their remote location and her apparent helplessness. Easing the door open a crack, she peered out. The night was dark, the moon now hidden behind clouds. She could make out two forms on the ground near the remains of a small fire. Johnson and the other man apparently asleep. Of Dawson, there was no sign. Heart-pounding, Jessamine slipped through the door. Where was Dawson? She couldn't leave without knowing his location. The risk of running straight into him was too great. A soft sound from behind the cabin caught her attention. Moving as quietly as possible, she edged around the building. There, leaning against the wall, was Dawson, smoking a cigarette, his face illuminated briefly as he took a drag. He seemed lost in thought, staring out into the darkness. Jessamine retreated silently. She needed to get to the horses, tied to a post about 20 yards from the cabin. If she could free one without being detected. She had taken only a few steps when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. "Don't scream," a familiar voice whispered in her ear. "It's me." Xavier, relief flooded through her as he slowly removed his hand from her mouth. In the dim light, she could make out his face, a dark bruise visible on his temple, but his eyes alert and determined. "How did you find me?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe he was real. "Followed your trail," he replied softly. "One of Dawson's men isn't as good at covering tracks as he thinks he is. Can you ride?" She nodded. "Dawson's behind the cabin, the other two are asleep by the fire." Xavier gestured to the darkness behind him, where she could just make out the shapes of several mounted men waiting silently. "Sheriff's posse," he explained. "They'll handle Dawson and his men. Let's get you out of here first." Taking her hand, he led her carefully away from the cabin toward the waiting riders, one dismounted, leading a spare horse forward. "Miss O'Malley," the sheriff greeted her in a hushed voice. "Glad we found you in one piece. Garrett here wouldn't rest until we'd organized a search party, despite his injuries." "Thank you, Sheriff," she whispered, emotion making her voice shake. Dawson was planning to cross into Mexico tomorrow with his men. "Not if I have anything to say about it," the sheriff replied grimly. "Garrett, get her back to town. We'll handle the rest." Xavier helped Jessamine mount the spare horse, then swung up onto his own. As they prepared to leave, the silence of the night was broken by a shout from the direction of the cabin. "They've spotted us," the sheriff said. "Go now." Xavier didn't need to be told twice. He spurred his horse forward, Jessamine following close behind as gunshots erupted behind them. They rode hard through the darkness, not slowing until the sounds of gunfire had faded into the distance. Finally, Xavier reined in his horse, turning to check on her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Did they hurt you?" "No, I'm fine," she assured him, though in truth she was exhausted and shaken. "But you're injured, your head." Even in the dim light, she could see the dried blood on his temple and the swelling around the wound. "It looks worse than it is," he said dismissively. Thomas got it worse, but the doctor says he'll recover. Mr. Thompson was just knocked out. I was so afraid, she admitted, her voice breaking, when I saw you on the floor bleeding. I promised I would find you, Xavier said simply, as if that explained everything, and I meant it. Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. Xavier, he urged his horse closer to hers, reaching out to take her hand. I thought I'd lost you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. When I came to and found you gone, I've never been so terrified in my life, not even when. He swallowed hard. Not even when Caroline died. Jessamine squeezed his hand, understanding the significance of his words. You found me, you kept your promise. And now I need to make another one, he said, his blue eyes intense even in the darkness. Jessamine, I know it hasn't been long, and God knows I'm not much of a catch, just a foreman with nothing to my name but my horse and whatever I've saved. But these past weeks, getting to know you. He took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say badly is that I think I'm falling in love with you. And if you could see your way to giving me a chance, I'd spend every day trying to make you happy. Joy, unexpected and overwhelming, washed through Jessamine. Oh, Xavier, she whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you too. His face transformed with a smile that made him look years younger. Leaning across the space between their horses, he kissed her gently, his lips warm and tender against hers. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, Xavier said, We should get back to town. The doctor will want to check you over, and you need rest. They rode side by side through the remainder of the night, talking softly of small things, comfortable in each other's company despite the ordeal they had just endured. As dawn broke over the Texas plains, Tascosa came into view, the small town bathed in golden light. It's beautiful, Jessamine said, seeing the harsh landscape with new eyes. It grows on you, Xavier agreed, looking at her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunrise. Like many things out here, at the doctor's house, they were met with relief and exclamations of concern. Doctor. Marshall insisted on examining both of them, declaring Xavier stubborn and lucky in equal measure for having ridden out with a concussion, and pronouncing Jessamine exhausted but otherwise unharmed. You both need rest, he said firmly. And food. Mrs. Marshall is preparing breakfast as we speak. While they ate in the doctor's kitchen, Sheriff Williams arrived with news. We got them, he announced without preamble. Dawson's dead shot while trying to escape. The other two surrendered. It's over, Miss O'Malley. Relief washed over Jessamine. Thank you, Sheriff. And thank you for organizing the search party. The sheriff chuckled. Don't thank me, thank Garrett here. Man was half dead himself, but he dragged himself up and insisted on tracking you immediately. Wouldn't take no for an answer, not even from the doctor. Xavier looked embarrassed by the praise. I made a promise, he said simply. After breakfast, Xavier escorted Jessamine to the town's small hotel where a room was arranged for her. You should rest, he told her at the door. I'll come back this evening if that's all right. I'd like that, she replied, suddenly shy. Xavier, thank you for everything, he smiled, touching her cheek gently. Get some sleep, Jessamine. We have a lot to talk about later. True to his word, Xavier returned that evening, looking much improved after rest and a proper cleaning of his wound. They sat together on the hotel's small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I've been thinking, Xavier said after a comfortable silence. About what happens next. Oh, Jessamine prompted, her heart beating a little faster. I know it's sudden, but he turned to face her directly. Jessamine O'Malley, I meant what I said last night. I'm falling in love with you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife. Joy bubbled up inside her. I'd like that very much, Xavier Garrett. His smile was brilliant. I don't have much to offer yet, but Mr. Thompson has offered me a partnership in the Cross T. Says he's getting too old to manage it all, and Thomas is more interested in numbers than cattle. With time, we could build something good there, a home. A home, Jessamine repeated, savoring the word. That sounds wonderful. Xavier took her hand, his expression turning serious. I need you to know something. I loved Caroline deeply, and losing her nearly destroyed me. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone again, but with you, it's different but just as real. You've brought something back to life in me that I thought was gone forever." Tears pricked at Jessamine's eyes. "And you've given me hope when I thought all was lost. I came to Texas looking for security, but I found so much more. I found you." He leaned forward, kissing her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of such moments. When they broke apart, both smiling, Xavier said, "So, Miss O'Malley, what do you say to a fall wedding? Give us time to get to know each other properly, and for me to build us a proper house at the Cross T." "That sounds perfect," she replied, her heart full to bursting with happiness. 3 months later, on a crisp October day, the small church in Tascosa was filled to capacity as Jessamine O'Malley became Jessamine Garrett. She wore a simple white dress that Martha and several other ranch women had helped her make, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Xavier, standing tall and handsome at the altar, looked at her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. "I choose her," he had said simply when the minister asked if he took this woman to be his wife, echoing the words he had spoken in his heart that day in the town hall when he first stood up for her. The celebration afterward at the Cross T was joyous, with food, music, and dancing lasting well into the night. The newly completed Garrett house, a modest but sturdy structure not far from the main ranch house, awaited them. Already furnished with a combination of items Xavier had crafted himself and wedding gifts from the community. As evening fell, the newlyweds slipped away from the celebration to their new home. Standing on the porch, Xavier swept Jessamine into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," he said, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, he set her down gently but kept his arms around her. "Are you happy?" he asked, a touch of uncertainty in his eyes. Jessamine reached up to touch his face, marveling that this good, strong man was now her husband. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "I came to Texas looking for a new beginning, and I found it with you." His kiss was a promise of all the days and nights to come, a future they would build together on the harsh but beautiful Texas plains. 5 years later, Jessamine sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Xavier teaching their 3-year-old son James to ride a gentle pony in the yard. Their infant daughter Caroline slept peacefully in her cradle beside Jessamine, her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. The Cross T had prospered under Xavier and Thomas Thompson's joint management. Old Mr. Thompson had passed peacefully the previous winter, secure in the knowledge that his life's work was in good hands. Xavier and Jessamine's home had grown along with their family, with Xavier adding rooms as needed, always with his meticulous attention to detail. Jessamine had found her place in the community as well, starting a small school for the children of the ranch workers and neighboring families. Her classroom, a converted bunkhouse on the ranch property, was filled with books donated by townsfolk and ordered from catalogs, fulfilling her dream of sharing her love of learning with others. The journey that had brought her to Texas had been fraught with danger and deception, but Jessamine never regretted answering that advertisement. It had led her, however circuitously, to Xavier and to the life they now shared, a life rich with love, purpose, and the joy of building something meaningful together. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier looked up from his lesson with James and smiled at her, that rare, full smile that still made her heart skip a beat. In that moment, watching her husband and son against the backdrop of the vast Texas sky, Jessamine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had come to Tascosa as a mail-order bride, called a fraud by the man who had deceived her. But she had found her true home with the quiet cowboy who had taken off his hat and chosen her not for what she could give him, but for who she was. And in that choice, they had both found the happiness that had once seemed beyond their reach.